Now we enter chapter 12, which to me feels like we're really shifting gears. In the early chapters we covered, it was an introduction to economics. Then we had an introduction to macroeconomics, learning CPI, real GDP, and those key variables. And then we got into a discussion of what the role of government should be, discussing classical versus Keynesian ideologies. And then, chapter 11 led from that. We discussed fiscal policy and the problems potentially with fiscal policy. Now we move to the money side of the economy. We think more about how banks operate, the financial system, and finally, the Federal Reserve. So chapter 12 is the first part of this section, which I feel like is the final basic concept in this class, money and banking. So this chapter is money, banking, and the financial system, where we learn how money operates, which is sounds simple. It sounds simple to say, how does money operate? Well, it's more complex than you might think. Things like inflation are determined in ways that are not as simple as you probably would imagine. And so in this chapter, we're going to introduce these concepts. The first thing we want to do is define money. And this is a question that ends up being actually a lot of fun to think about and a lot more challenging than would meet the eye. Just to give you an example, let's think about things as being money or not money. Let's go through some different assets and evaluate, is this considered money or not? Starting in the U.S. with cash and coins, I think we would all agree that cash and coins is money. Okay, you can spend it, you will accept it for payment. It's what we often use when we're making purchases. But what about money in a checking account? Okay. When I think about my money that's in a checking account, I certainly consider it money, but is it money? Well, this is interesting to think about because my money that's in a checking account isn't actually in the account. Instead, it's been loaned out and someone else is spending it. So certainly I would consider this money, but the amazing thing about this money is two people are using it at once. Me, I'm accessing my money online, spending it. I'm even if I'm not accessing my money online, I'm spending my other money knowing that that money is there. Meaning if I know I've got 20 grand in the bank, I'm more likely to spend the cash that I have right now, okay? But at the same time, somebody else is spending that money too. So this is interesting because this doesn't actually exist in a sense. The money that's in my checking account isn't really mine. Someone else is using it. But we would certainly consider this money, right? What about a house? Would you consider a house money? Well, it has some of these similar attributes to money. It has value. People would accept it for payment potentially. If I owe somebody something, they might accept my house in a trade. But certainly we wouldn't call a house money most of the time. Okay? So we need to figure out a way to set some criteria for money and decide what truly is money. And so money, we believe, has three functions. So I'm going to call this the three criteria for money. Meaning money needs to satisfy all three of these constraints to truly be considered money. The first is that money must be a medium of exchange. It needs to facilitate trade, okay? This means that money must be universally accepted for trade. And certainly money, cash and coins, is universally accepted for trade. In fact, it is against the law not to accept U.S. currency if you owe someone money. So for example, if I owe a friend $20 and I offer him $20 US and he says, well, I don't want it, you can actually legally say, well, you have to take this or nothing else. If you're in debt to someone, they have to accept US currency legally. So that's the reason why that law is set up, is to help encourage money being, US cash and coins, truly being a medium of exchange, meaning everyone accepts it for payment. So this is the simple one. This is simply just saying everyone should accept it for a trade. That's probably the easiest one of these three criteria. The second is that money should be a store of value. And what this basically means is that money must maintain, generally speaking, a near constant value over time. And of course, the immediate critique you might have of that is, well, what about inflation? We certainly have had a lot of inflation in the U.S. over many decades. Right now, inflation is about 2%, so money is not maintaining its value. That's an interesting point. There is no perfect criteria for what a store of value really means, but basically, money needs to hold its value well enough that I don't want to try to spend my money right now so that I can spend the money while it's valuable. In other words, if inflation is too high, I want to spend my money now before it loses its value. Okay? Money needs to hold its value well enough that I don't have that incentive. Okay? So, what is the criteria? What does it mean to store value? Can it go up 5% in a year and that be okay? Essentially, yes. But you basically need money to be stable enough that everyone understands its value and we're not, rushing out to try to spend our money as soon as we get it. Okay, so money needs to store its value pretty well. This is an important criteria, and if you think about retirement, imagine trying to retire without money, without any sort of money. It'd really be quite difficult. And so money, because it provides a store of value, really helps us to retire. So for example, if I'm working today, I can turn my efforts today into consumption 50 years from now. Meaning I can take the money I have now and save it and then spend it 50 years from now, which allows me in my 80s to use my efforts in my 30s to my advantage. If we didn't have money, that'd be very difficult. For example, if I'm a corn farmer and there's no money, there's really no way to retire. I have to keep producing corn in order to trade it for goods and services. Without money, there's really no way for me to retire. The third criteria is definitely the most challenging. This is the one students have trouble with the most. Money must be a unit of account. And this one is tricky. Basically what this means is that when people assess value, they do so through money. So for example, okay, when people assess value, they do so through money. For example, if I ask you, how much is a Coca-Cola worth? How much is a 20-ounce Coca-Cola worth? Your answer would probably be in dollars and cents, because US dollars and cents is your unit of account. It's the unit you use to account for value. So if I'm selling you a house or a car or whatever, and I tell you, my car's $20,000, we both know what that means. We're on the same playing field, okay? We don't have to argue what $20,000 is. We just know it because we're so used to making transactions in U.S. currency, okay? So what this basically does is it allows transactions to run smoothly since both parties inherently understand the value of their money or their unit of account. In the U.S., again, that's U.S. currency. If you're in Germany, it's the euro, right? Whatever your unit of account is. So this is important because it allows transactions to run more smoothly, okay? For money to truly be money, it needs to fit all of these criteria. And you can see why we would land on our current monetary system if you think about alternatives. So let me give you an alternative. In prisons, a lot of times they use cigarettes as money. So if you're purchasing something, you use cigarettes. So it may satisfy a medium of exchange. Okay, the cigarettes might satisfy a medium of exchange, meaning everyone is willing to trade for it. But cigarettes are never going to be a good form of money because they can't provide a good store of value. Cigarettes go bad over time, so eventually they're going to lose their value. So if you're thinking about money, you can just use these three criteria to evaluate how well the money is doing. Okay? If a country has really bad inflation, it's not going to provide a good store of value. Okay? If we think about something like Bitcoin, if you're familiar with Bitcoin, it's a digital currency. Not a lot of people use it, so not everyone would accept it in transactions. It's not a good unit of account because a lot of people don't know what Bitcoin is worth. So this is a good way to evaluate is money functioning properly or not. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is a brief history of the origins of money. And we'll go straight from that to a discussion of the history of banking. The story really all connects actually quite fluidly between money and banking have, for a long period of time, been very closely related. So money has different origins everywhere. But what our currency in the U.S. most looks like is the types of currencies that they had in Europe. So if you go way back in time, thousands of years, I'm going to be kind of vague here and just say thousands of years ago because different societies figured out money at different time periods. So if you go back, back to 3000 BC, you're going to find some money somewhere, and it's going to all look pretty much the same everywhere. Money begins with people trading and then deciding there's something that they all agree to trade for and with. Okay, so thousands of years ago, people would trade goods and services. And there was no money. Okay, so if we're going back 10,000 years ago, not a lot of money. Okay, people were trading goods and services for other goods and services. This is called a barter economy. In a barter economy, unfortunately, it doesn't work real well. There's a lot of problems with a barter economy, and a lot of these problems stem from the concept of a double coincidence of wants. So this is a strange key term in this chapter. A double coincidence of wants. Okay? What this means is, for trade to occur, I must have what you want. And you must have what I want. Any trade must be set up with a double coincidence of wants. It's just in today's economy, this is a lot easier because one of the coincidences is you like money and I like money. So if I really want a beer, you'll accept money. I don't have to figure out what you want. I know what you want. You want money because everyone wants money. In a barter economy, this is a lot more challenging. Okay, so for example, just to illustrate this point, let's say that I'm a farmer and I have peanuts, for example, and I want bread. Okay, this is very common in a barter economy that the producers would produce just maybe one thing. Okay, so the only thing I produce is peanuts, and I want some bread. For this transaction to work out perfectly, the bread maker needs to want peanuts. That's the only way this is going to work. If that's not the case, then think about what I'm going to have to do. What if I have peanuts and want bread, and the bread maker wants cucumbers, for example? What am I going to have to do to make this trade occur? I've got to figure out a way to create a double coincidence of wants. So what I'm going to have to do is take my peanuts and go out there and find somebody who has cucumbers to facilitate a trade. And I better hope that there's somebody out there farming cucumbers that wants my peanuts. If that's not happening, then I might have to take another trade. So what ends up happening in a barter economy is people spend so much effort just to facilitate trade. Okay? Just to make the actual trades happen is very challenging. And furthermore, even once we have the thing that the other person wants, even once we set up the double coincidence of wants, it can be a big problem because we might not understand what the exchange rate should be, right? You and I, we both understand what a US dollar is. That's our unit of account. But in these barter economies, there is no unit of account, right? I have peanuts, you've got bread. I don't know what the exchange rate should be on peanuts to bread, so we're probably going to spend a lot of time arguing about it, which is going to waste time, and it may lead to the trade not even happening, okay? So barter economies work very poorly because of this problem. Double coincidence of wants are always required in trade, but in a barter economy, they're especially difficult because there's no money, okay? Over time, this is going to change. And this is different in different societies, but over time, some goods would become common in trading. Okay? So for example, let me get back to what I was just discussing with me. Let's say that I'm a peanut farmer and I want lots of items, which is realistic, right? If I'm producing peanuts, there's probably a lot of things I want. I can go all over town trying to trade my peanuts, but maybe that's not going to go real well. So what I might think is I might think to myself, what could I trade for that a lot of people would want? Okay? Not everybody wants peanuts, but everybody might want spices, or everybody might want meat, right? There may be specific items that a lot of people want. In a lot of Europe, what ends up happening is there are precious metals like gold and silver that lots of people want. And so if I'm a peanut farmer, I might decide to trade for gold and silver. There's some benefits to this, all right? Rather than trading my peanuts for meat, which will eventually go bad, the gold and silver is never going to go bad. So I can trade for gold and silver and just hold it, right? I can wait and decide what I want to purchase with it. Essentially, gold and silver provides a good store of value, which makes it a good form of money, right? It's satisfying one of those three criteria of money already. So a lot of people begin trading for gold and silver. Even though there are many people in society that don't really need gold or silver, enough people want it to incentivize everyone to want it. Okay? Enough people want it to incentivize everyone to want it. What I mean by this is, maybe I have no interest in gold and silver. I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to make any jewelry. Maybe I don't even really like gold and silver for whatever reason. The bottom line is, even if I don't like gold and silver, I am willing to trade for it because I know other people do. So it's kind of like you reach a tipping point. When enough people like a certain item, it becomes something that's worthwhile for everyone to trade, and suddenly everyone is willing to trade for it. It becomes a medium of exchange. Money has experiences something called a network externality. Okay? You may have seen this term externality in another economics class, perhaps. It's a very important economics term in microeconomics. A network externality basically means the value of the item increases as more people use it. So gold and silver is worth something, but it becomes more valuable when other people want it. It becomes more valuable when people are willing to use it, okay? To give you another example of a network externality, Instagram. If no one's on Instagram, you have no interest in being on Instagram, right? But the fact that your friends are on Instagram is what makes you want to be on it as well. There's a network externality in the sense that as more people use Instagram, the more you want to use it, okay? Same thing with gold and silver here. The more people that are willing to trade for gold and silver, the more willing you are to trade for gold and silver, okay? So in a lot of these societies, they end up using gold and silver. So, gold and silver becomes money. It satisfies the criteria that we discussed before. It's a medium of exchange because everyone wants it. Once enough people use it, everyone wants it because of the network externality effect. So it becomes a medium of exchange. It's a really good store of value. Gold and silver holds its value very well through time. And also it becomes a unit of account once enough people use it. Once you and I make a lot of trades in gold and silver, eventually we come to terms with understanding their value. We get used to it. So gold and silver does a good job of satisfying those three criteria. But it's not without its faults. Okay, gold and silver works pretty well, but it's not perfect. And there's one specific problem that ends up being very important in the future. And the problem arises from the issue of security. Essentially, walking around with gold and silver in 2000 BC is really quite dangerous. Most of these small cities that we're talking about in Europe don't have, a police force. They don't have a lot of good safety measures. So you may be concerned that someone's going to steal your gold and silver. You could leave your gold and silver at your house, but that's an issue too, right? There are locks and there are mechanisms to protect things, but it's not as safe as it is today. So people wanted a safe place to put their money. And there are no banks at this point in time, right? There are no banks, so you can't just take your gold and silver to the bank. But you want to do something. You want to figure out a place to save it where you know no one else is going to get it. And this ends up being important because the people that can keep money safe end up becoming bankers. This is where banking develops, okay? So in a lot of these societies, the answer was goldsmiths. Now, you've probably heard of blacksmiths, right? Blacksmiths, I believe they work with iron, all right? A goldsmith is someone who works with gold to make jewelry or to, melt it into coins, which is what was happening during this period. We started creating gold and silver coins. So what happens is people would take their money, their gold, to a goldsmith. And the reason why they would take it to the goldsmith is because the goldsmith already has gold. So the goldsmith has already put significant effort into protecting their gold. Okay? So maybe they had something like a vault that would keep the gold safe. Maybe they just have a bunch of people protecting the gold 24/7. But the bottom line is, if you're protecting gold, it's not much harder to protect more gold, right? Meaning, if I've got a pound of gold right now and I want to protect it, it's just as hard to protect 1 pound as it is to protect 2 pounds. So from the goldsmith's perspective, watching more gold would be easy. And so people would come to the goldsmith and say, I'll give you some peanuts if you protect my gold for me. And they'd say, sure, why not, right? I get something out of it and I'm still protecting my gold anyway, so it's not any harder. So people are taking their money to the goldsmiths like crazy, okay? Starting to look a little bit like banks. And what would happen is goldsmiths would issue IOUs, pieces of paper, right? You know what an IOU is, right? It's just a little piece of paper that says I owe you some money. And these were called warehouse receipts, is what they refer to these as. But they're essentially just IOUs. They're just pieces of paper, okay? And goldsmiths would issue IOUs to people who deposited gold. And so let's think about what this would look like, okay? I'm going to erase everything up here, and let's think about what these transactions would look like. I'm going to draw a little diagram here to sort of explain what's going on. So here's my goldsmith. And here's just a typical consumer. Okay? What would happen is the consumer would take their gold to the goldsmith, and in return they would get these IOUs, right? They're called warehouse receipts, but I don't really care if you know that name, so I'm just going to call them IOUs. And so the consumer would get the IOUs. And so the consumer is walking around with these pieces of paper that say, you know, essentially you have gold. So the consumer, anytime they wanted to make a purchase, would go to the goldsmith, exchange the piece of paper for gold, and then take the gold to whoever they're going to purchase something from. Okay? So they're going to take, you know, the gold over to the farmer to purchase something, right? And so the gold goes to the farmer, and the consumer has food. Now what's the farmer going to do? Now the farmer has gold. The farmer is going to take the gold to the goldsmith and get the IOU. So the goldsmith is going to write a new IOU for the farmer. So let's just rehash what just happened. The consumer who has the piece of paper goes to the goldsmith, gets their gold back out, purchases it, spends it to the farmer. The farmer now has gold, doesn't want to hold it because it's not safe, takes the gold to the goldsmith, and then gets the IOU. Well, this is kind of wasteful, isn't it? What they realize is, look, instead of going and making all these extra trips to the goldsmith, why don't we just take the piece of paper, the IOU, and just trade that? Why don't we just trade the piece of paper instead? There's a couple of benefits to that. One, it's a lot faster because we don't have to make these trips to the goldsmiths back and forth. And two, it's safer because we're never actually holding the gold anymore. The gold stays with the goldsmith, and now we're just trading the pieces of paper. This ends up being so important because from the goldsmith's perspective now, things have changed. Over time, and this may take decades for this to occur, and it occurred in different places in Europe simultaneously. It all very organically occurred. So over time, people began trading the IOUs instead of the gold. And so think about what's going on now for the goldsmith. The goldsmith now is just protecting gold. That's never withdrawn. Meaning, the goldsmith has a lot of gold. Lots of people have brought their gold to the goldsmith. And the gold is being protected in a vault, and nobody's ever coming to get it. So the goldsmith's got tons of gold, lots of value just sitting there, and no one is using it. These people are poor, right? If we're talking 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, these people aren't wealthy. So when there's a bunch of wealth sitting there in the vault, the goldsmith might try to take advantage of this. And one thing the goldsmith could do is spend the gold that they have. But that's kind of silly. Why spend the gold when you could just print a new IOU and spend that instead? So in some cases, goldsmiths would be writing new IOUs and spending it. And the IOUs, see, aren't really attached to the gold. Okay? Let's put it this way. Let's imagine I've got 10 pounds of gold, a whole bunch of gold, right? And there are IOUs issued for all of that gold that's out there. Well, if I'm the goldsmith, I might just write a new IOU for 1 ounce of gold and spend it. And I'm not really worried about this being a problem because if somebody brings back the IOU, I've got plenty of gold that I can give to that person, right? the only way this is going to mess up, if I'm creating new IOUs, the only way this system is going to be messed up is if everyone tries to come withdraw their gold simultaneously and they realize there's more IOUs than there is gold. But the goldsmith's not so worried about that because remember, the gold is just sitting there. Nobody's ever coming to withdraw it. Eventually, all right, and there were years where goldsmiths would, spend money from the IOUs. They would basically just print fake IOUs that aren't really attached to gold. But eventually what the goldsmiths realize is spending it can work, but there is another option that would also work. The goldsmiths began loaning IOUs that were not actually backed by gold. Right? They're printing an IOU that says 5 ounces of gold, and they're loaning it to someone, but that IOU really isn't, there's no gold really attached to that, meaning the gold that I have is from all my deposits. And when I make this loan, I'm printing a new IOU. This is basically what our banks do today, right? We take our money there, and they loan out the money, and they end up making more loans than the actual money that they have in a very strange way that we're going to have to get to in a later chapter. What ends up happening is the goldsmiths are printing more IOUs, and everyone accepts it. Nobody really questions the system. So when I loan my 5-ounce IOU to someone, they're going to pay me back with interest. But in the meantime, that 5-ounce note is going to get traded, and it's going to get transacted just as it would if it were real gold. So suddenly these IOUs become gold. People treat them the same as they would gold. And the amazing thing is that the goldsmith is creating new gold. Every time they write a new IOU that's not really attached to gold, people spend it. And they spend it as if it really is gold. So in a way, the goldsmith increases the amount of gold that's in this society in this strange synthetic way. Okay? So by issuing new IOUs, and remember, these IOUs aren't really attached to any gold. They're not really backed by gold. The goldsmith increases the money supply, increasing wealth for this society. There may only be 10 pounds of gold at the goldsmith, but by issuing these new IOUs, there are now 20 pounds worth of IOUs floating around. So the society actually gets wealthier in a strange way. Okay? It gets wealthier because the society really does feel like the amount of gold is doubled. So they increase the amount of spending they're doing, and it stimulates economic activity. So these goldsmiths who are really just being jerks, they were just taking advantage of a system, really cheating the system. The people who are taking their money to the goldsmiths, they don't know they're issuing these IOUs. Nobody really knows this is happening. But the system works, and everyone benefits from it. And these are banks. These eventually become banks that look very similar to our banks today. In fact, our monetary system is still pretty similar to this. Our monetary system was based on coins, which were made of gold and silver. And if you took the gold and silver to the bank, they'd give you pieces of paper, which become dollar bills. The IOUs that the goldsmiths use are basically the same as the pieces of paper that we use today. So our monetary system is still not that far removed from what the goldsmiths were doing back in BC era. Okay? So that's the origin of money. People are trading something, they're looking for something that people will accept. In Europe, a lot of times it became gold and silver and bronze, precious metals. As people begin trading gold and silver, they want a place to save it. They look to the goldsmiths. Gold is what they're really concerned with because it's the most valuable. They really want to protect their gold. So they take it to the goldsmiths, and eventually the goldsmiths start creating synthetic IOUs and loaning those out into society, increasing the amount of gold, right, the IOUs that are in society, spurring more economic activity. This really does a lot of amazing things. It allows people a chance to borrow money, which was not well set up prior to the goldsmiths creating this concept. It rises the amount of gold that's in the society, spurring economic activity, and it helps move us towards a modern economy. This is really quite a breakthrough, and it was all based on the goldsmiths just being jerks, right, and taking advantage of the system they had.